You start most of the slides with a holistic term on that. So what is behind the holistic idea?
So I wasn't sure where the word holistic came from, and it comes from holism. And so I think in the world we currently live in, we do one thing, do it well. And I suppose the paradigm there is that, the next person does their thing well and the next thing well. And, and then you get the aggregate of that. But I think at least in some parts of the world and the economy, that those bits are no longer coherent and maybe are growing out of control, mainly due to the financial system. The idea of, as you grow these networks, they're always compelled, or it's engineered in, that you always have to look at the immediate impact and the network impact of what you're contributing right now is going to do to the network, not just right now, but looking forward, projecting forward. The other thing is more personal, that I discovered a guy called James Lovelock, who is the inventor of Gaia theory, a mad maverick scientist he's sort of badged at, but he was the guy that discovered the hole in the ozone layer, and he did that because he created his own little device that fired electrons at the atmosphere, and then he went on a cruise ship from pole to pole to provide the data. That's an example of holistic. He couldn't just go to the Arctic, but he went all across the curve of the Earth and picked up the data set over. And obviously, once he did that, other people contributed to it. Then you actually understood the issue about what was happening in the ozone layers. And then that provided enough coherence and understanding to allow the world en masse to change its behavior.
What is, in your opinion, a holistic idea of Web 1 or Web 2?
Having lived through the dot-com era, it was just like a mass explosion of what's possible, and no rules or it was all self-governed or protocol-driven, a new frontier that hadn't been around for a while. But I think it was just because it was possible, you just did it. And then Web 2, for some reason, the people that had gone through that experience thought there's something fundamentally missing. So the first notion of networking and holism might have been the social side. So, okay, you can do things individually, but as you started to connect, and I suppose where that went wrong, or at the start of that journey, it was open source and open protocols like RSS, Atom, OpenID, that when the money came in, and money came in at scale, networking freedom became centralized engineering cloud computing paradigm. But during that journey, having seen how OpenID became Facebook Connect or other single logins, so there's definitely that network growth and the internet itself, and then the social paradigm. And I suppose that peer-to-peer paradigm got kicked back up the agenda with the release of Satoshi's paper. And at that time, I was working on this peer-to-peer data science swing application using Raspberry Pis and everything mobile.
So you're talking about values of a new era. What's the summary of digital needs that this holistic idea will become true?
You only get to this holistic if most people can participate. And so this was this big drive, these non-coding. To reach the holism goal, then most people have to participate, because by definition, if the network can't allow everybody to participate, you will never get a holistic view of what you're looking at. I would say that Web 2 has shown the social networks, even though centralized, if you do strike the right chord, and they get a holistic view onto what the world's doing.
It's a social network in Web 2.0. So what we have an interface from a technical point of view, and we have a database behind this engine with this sharing content. What is your new proposal with stuff you are doing?
You say Web 2 was, these things are highly sophisticated, and you can see how many tens of thousands of very smart people they're needed to run. But in the end of the day, it's a bit of static content and a social graph. And then all the data science or the PageRank algorithm, that's securely on the centralized in the corporation's hands. What I've been trying to do in the Health Oracle protocol, the software behind it's called SafeFlow Entity Component System, was to try and bring an engine that brought all three parts of what a centralized entity had, open source it. So the paradigm of an entity component system was like a computer game paradigm, so a very rich graphical driven interface. And then there's this data science engine, but it can plug in smart things to it. Everybody's free to plug in their own open source smart things to it. And then the third thing is the engineering that allows you to coordinate the coherence across the peer-to-peer network. And so that spawned the idea of a knowledge bundle ledger. And it's this knowledge bundle ledger entries that allow you to securely and efficiently do computations or machine learning peer-to-peer. We still call it decentralized machine learning.
What kind of people should use your platform at first? Could you describe your first user?
So I would like to think that there is a broad set of crypto anarchists be made aware that they can build certain devices and get their own data. And then as a very small community, we can start to share stuff and do stuff more interesting. But again, in terms of this holistic drive, I know it's like more ambitious, but it's almost like just self-evident that wearables on its own don't tell me the complete view of my health. So that inspired me to, if I can monitor my sleep, so I monitor my air quality and temperature. So again, that analytics is just like ready to come on board. I think there is a core group of people out there are looking for that holistic view. But as I said, on many fronts, by definition, for a holistic view, you need multiple data sources. And more important, as the community of peers start to cohere around some value added, tangible value added, that message will get to more people. And again, it wouldn't be like one network and then one person in the community starting to aggregate like a monopoly of data that each peer would add brand new infrastructure and computations and share. And that won't necessarily give you a holistic view and solve the real big problems in society or individual health, because that will come by motivating other people in different parts of the data ecology, if you like, to contribute another new data set. We do have to grow the social graph, but we also need to grow the types of data and the resolutions of the data. So this is like, Airbnb, multi-sided market, and maybe this is a multi-sided market on steroids.
You could just explain this possibility topic, exploring data, sharing data, exploring transparency, security, where this growth will happen and why do you think it will go through the stages of learning to optimization?
I haven't talking too much about security. I would say that has not been prioritized at this stage of what we're doing, because was it possible for this computer game engine come data science engine come peer-to-peer protocol to put in? And I would say it was really just about 2020 that I managed to pull all those parts together. The key components to get the data flowing is a thing called the Gamma Hub Network Library. And I came up with this concept of reference contracts. If you're in Web3, you might call them smart contracts. So 2020 was possible. So in the last 2 years, other people use it and make that engine reliable. So I said for those three use cases, wearables, air quality, and also on the wider environment, river data, this year I prioritized getting it running in the cloud in a sort of peer-to-peer fashion, which has opened up the possibility. Now we have to find the use case to share with those people and see if it is the thing that they're looking for. Basically, onboarding the data would be the biggest refinement. And then now that you've got the data, then you can actually visualize it and slice and dice it and basically understand how to use the toolkit's capabilities to just visualize your own data in a way that you're completely free to do it. And if you've got multiple data sources coming into your own account, then you might be able to do that. That would be phase one of the graph refinement.
Could I tell that Web 2 is content management value which been transferred to end user, or what you're proposing is data management content?
Yeah, that's a very practical way of looking at it. Yeah, and I'll maybe just tell another story which I think is relevant. You prompted that pre-starting this particular project I built, I was inspired by meeting Matt Mulligan in 2004, 5, 6, when WordPress was very embryonic. That there did seem to be this content management by basically publishing and the freedom to publish. But it did seem to me that there was no infrastructure to do that on the newsfeed, the aggregation. So I started playing around with aggregating open RSS feeds. So yeah, you're right. So I do think we've still got huge challenges of still getting the data flowing. So what's missing is this empowerment to do what PageRank or the AI filter on the newsfeed does, but allowing you enough tools to bias it towards your agenda. How do we actually allow these autonomous sovereign peers, if you like, to aggregate their learning?
So you brought the WordPress. In what sense creation of WordPress has an influence on the web itself, on the internet itself, on how people are using itself. What is your opinion on that?
And I've not counted them all, but I still hear this phrase, 30-40% of all websites on the internet are WordPress. But they put service, e-commerce website. Then there's lots of engineering to keep the site up, refine ideas and products and support. And then you've got the long tail of everybody doing it themselves or using other businesses that help them do that. But there's no coherent way for all those projects to share. So what I'm basically saying now is maybe we could actually do something different. If there was a network plug in there, like the Hoth Oracle protocol, then say, for example, all the long tail of individual, then they could start to aggregate their learning. And I'm sure in some ways, services like Jetpack that provide like spam services across the long tail. And so this was from a crypto peer-to-peer person is, could you put that into an open protocol and thus not just one open source commercial entity or many, commercial entities, but the network itself becomes stronger by just adhering to a common protocol.
So you've been talking about this magic number of WordPress community and personalized way of doing things. Compare WordPress to Wikipedia. Where are some intersections and what the huge difference between these two projects?
You made me smile mentioning Wikipedia. So every project I starts with Wikipedia. So even today in the network library, the first thing you have to do is onboard a data type. The one I use is Wikipedia and Digpedia for the RDF. But to go into this paradigm of okay, it's a centralized website, but if you get a community of editors and policies, the right policies in place, it doesn't really matter if it's not decentralized because it's going to build valuable resource for society. So they've built a community in that paradigm and it seems to persist. And I don't think I want to just encourage that to do anything differently. So the definition of swimming on Wikipedia, a small group of people in the world that decided this group of words and the structure of sentences and languages, and then how they subcategorize it into the strokes and techniques and people associated that with swimming and equipment and water and the physics of fluids and stuff. But the holistic definition of swimming that I'm aiming for is actually how I and all the other peers in the world that participate in swimming, whether it be recreational or on your holiday or as an Olympic athlete, that's really the data of the world that means swimming. And I don't think Wikipedia ever aspires to be that, but I think the conceptual framework, and now we can use that to achieve that holistic goal for swimming and obviously everything else on the internet.
A source of truth. What's the link to this influence through the technology you're providing? Once again, the WordPress is the PHP engine which works with relational database. What is the difference of the holistic software?
Peer-to-peer wasn't something new in my life, but I wasn't technical until the Satoshi white paper of things like the Gossip Network, which is this peer-to-peer plumbing to allow a distributed or decentralized network to communicate. And as soon as I knew that sort of domain of technology existed and through peer-to-peer gossip, so like word of mouth and branching out, and it's an efficient way to get to eventual consensus. Whereas this Comedia was based on, I think, XOR distance, which gave you like uncorrelated physical distance between peers and then there's a whole lot of variations in between. So I started to realize that to do this peer-to-peer stuff fundamentally right, then you needed to start with a peer-to-peer infrastructure. So basically 2008, 9, 10, that's when I started to discover these peer-to-peer protocols. So I found one in Node and basically did this quick example of creating 800 nodes, gave it a simple computation to do, and then actually asked it to randomly go across this network and stop when it felt and see whether it could random sample 800 nodes. And that gave me an insight of what, say, Floaty's entity component system. So this very compact bit of software that would actually run on each peer node and allow this coordination. And again, the database wasn't primary, but it would create this ledger. The database didn't become less important. But it was more like a ledger. There was a standardization, but it was around the ledger, which was sort of a tighter thing, I felt. So today I use a thing called Hypercore, a Hypertree, which came out of the DAP project. And now I would outsource the ledger to things like the Safe Network. The Health Oracle protocol has no desire to own and control the data. The peers will do that. And that's a whole paradigm of problem in itself. Be proposing that the Health Oracle protocol, this decentralized machine learning, will probably be working on the peer-to-peer network of the SAFE network. It's like a layer 2 and using their BLS cryptography multi-sig flows to allow the DML protocol to speak to the knowledge bundle ledger of the peer and the compute engine and the data source. So this is the point I'm trying to get to is I only think the next phase of really important problems can be tackled in a holism context. And anybody that thinks that one particular device or data science algorithm or gene editing solution or chemical formula, a new super drug is going to be enough to solve everything. No, I'm of the view that it's the holistic look across all that, continually monitoring and keeping it in check, and also providing feedback on what might be working to allow more energy to go into the more promising areas.